There's a specific pattern that distinguishes people who consistently achieve objectives from those who consistently fall short. It's not intelligence in the conventional sense, IQ, education, knowledge accumulation. It's operational effectiveness, the ability to navigate complex environments, manage relationships strategically, and produce desired outcomes regardless of circumstances. Most people operate reactively. They respond to situations based on immediate emotional reactions rather than strategic assessment. They make decisions based on how things feel, rather than analyzing what approach would produce desired results. They engage with people based on automatic social patterns, rather than calibrated communication. This reactive operation produces inconsistent results. Sometimes they succeed when circumstances align favorably. Sometimes they fail when conditions turn difficult. Their outcomes depend heavily on external factors beyond their control. Niccolò Machiavelli observed that effective leaders operated differently. They assessed situations strategically before responding. They managed relationships based on what would produce desired outcomes rather than what felt authentic or comfortable. They calibrated their approach based on actual conditions rather than maintaining consistency for its own sake. This strategic operation produced more consistent results. When circumstances were favorable, they capitalized fully. When conditions were difficult, they adapted approaches to maintain progress. Their outcomes depended more on their strategic adjustments than on external circumstances. The difference isn't moral. Strategic operators aren't better or worse people than reactive ones. The difference is effectiveness. Strategic operation produces better results more consistently across varying circumstances. This effectiveness comes from specific capabilities that can be developed through deliberate practice. These aren't personality traits you're born with. They're skills you can build through focused attention and consistent application. Most people never develop these capabilities because they're not taught in conventional education. Schools teach knowledge accumulation and analytical thinking. They don't teach strategic communication, relationship management, or outcome-focused operation. This creates a gap between conventional intelligence and operational effectiveness. You can be highly educated and intellectually sophisticated while being operationally ineffective. Conversely, you can have modest formal education while being highly effective operator through developed strategic capabilities. What follows are 8 core capabilities that distinguish strategically effective operators from reactive ones. Each represents skill that can be deliberately developed. Each produces measurable improvement in your ability to navigate complex situations and achieve desired outcomes. Type this in the comments. I operate strategically, not reactively. Most people overcommunicate. When asked questions, they provide complete answers with full context and reasoning. When sharing plans, they explain every detail and motivation. When describing situations, they give comprehensive accounts, leaving nothing ambiguous. This complete transparency seems honest and authentic. It's also strategically limiting. Every piece of information you share is intelligence you're providing to listeners. The more completely you explain yourself, the more predictable you become. The more predictable you are, the less negotiating power you maintain. Consider professional contexts. The person who explains complete reasoning for every decision provides roadmap for how to influence them. I can't do this because of X, Y, and Z tells listeners that if they can address X, Y, and Z, they can change your decision. The person who simply states decisions without explaining complete reasoning maintains stronger position. I've decided not to do this provides no leverage points for negotiation. The decision is communicated clearly without volunteering information about the reasoning process. Machiavelli was explicit about this. Never reveal your complete thinking. The advisor who explained every consideration gave opponents information about how to manipulate future decisions. The advisor who stated conclusions without revealing full analysis maintained stronger position. This selective disclosure doesn't mean being secretive about everything. It means being deliberate about what information you share and what you keep private. Some information advances your interests when shared. Some information weakens your position when disclosed. The strategic operator distinguishes between these categories and shares selectively based on what serves their objectives. They're not automatically transparent because transparency feels honest. They're strategically transparent when transparency serves their interests, and strategically opaque when complete disclosure would weaken their position. In negotiations, this means not revealing how much you need the outcome. In relationships, this means not explaining every emotional process you're experiencing. In professional settings, this means not volunteering complete reasoning for strategic decisions. The key is maintaining genuine substance behind your selective disclosure. If you're being opaque about lack of substance, that eventually becomes apparent. If you're being selective about revealing genuine depth, that creates sustainable advantage. Most people err toward over-disclosure because they're uncomfortable with ambiguity, and they conflate transparency with honesty. But you can be completely honest while being selective about what information you volunteer. Honesty means not lying when asked directly. It doesn't mean volunteering every piece of information that might be relevant. Strategic operators become comfortable with maintaining some ambiguity about their full thinking. They share what advances their objectives while keeping private what would weaken their position if disclosed. Different situations require different approaches. Different people respond to different communication styles. Different environments reward different behaviors. Effective operators adapt their approach based on context rather than maintaining rigid consistency. Most people pride themselves on being the same in every situation. They call this authenticity or integrity. But maintaining identical approach across varying contexts isn't authenticity, it's inflexibility. Real integrity is maintaining core values while adapting approach based on what will be effective. Consider communication styles. Some people respond well to direct confrontation. Others shut down when confronted and respond better to indirect suggestion. Using identical approach with both types means being effective with one and ineffective with the other. Machiavelli observed that effective leaders adjusted their approach based on circumstances. The approach that worked during peacetime didn't work during war. The communication style effective with nobles wasn't effective with common people. Rigid consistency meant being effective only in specific circumstances. Strategic adaptation means assessing the situation and adjusting your approach accordingly. You're not being fake, you're being effective. Your core values remain constant, but your tactical approach adjusts based on what will work. In professional contexts, this might mean being more formal with senior leadership and more casual with peers. Not because you're being inauthentic, but because different contexts have different communication norms, and working within those norms is more effective than ignoring them. In personal relationships, this might mean adjusting how you raise concerns based on the other person's communication preferences. Some people want direct feedback. Others need more gentle approach. Giving everyone identical feedback style means being effective with some people and ineffective with others. The key is adaptation within authentic range. You're not becoming a completely different person in each context. You're emphasizing different aspects of your actual personality and capabilities based on what will be effective. Think of it as having repertoire of approaches rather than single rigid style. Professional musician can play different styles based on audience and venue. They're not being inauthentic, they're being versatile. Same principle applies to interpersonal effectiveness. Most people resist this because they want to just be themselves in every situation. But being yourself doesn't require using identical approach in every context. It means being genuine while adapting your tactical approach based on what will actually work. Strategic operators develop range of effective approaches and deploy them based on contextual assessment, rather than maintaining rigid consistency regardless of circumstances. Emotional reactions are automatic. You feel anger when threatened, fear when uncertain, joy when rewarded. These emotions are information about your psychological state. They're not necessarily accurate guides for action. Most people act on emotional impulses. They feel anger and express it. They feel fear and avoid. They feel attraction and pursue. This emotional reactivity means their behavior is determined by their feelings rather than by strategic assessment of what would produce desired outcomes. Strategic operators separate emotional experience from behavioral response. They feel emotions fully, but choose responses based on what will be effective rather than what feelings compel them toward. Machiavelli described this as maintaining composure regardless of internal state. The leader who displays emotional reaction gives opponents information about how to manipulate them. The leader who maintains composed exterior, regardless of internal experience, maintains stronger position. This isn't emotional suppression in an unhealthy sense. You're not trying to stop feeling emotions. You're developing capability to feel emotions while maintaining behavioral control. You experience anger without automatically expressing it. You feel fear without automatically avoiding. You notice attraction without automatically pursuing. This separation creates space for strategic assessment. Instead of automatically reacting to emotion, you can evaluate, given my objective here, what response would be most effective. Sometimes that aligns with emotional impulse, sometimes it doesn't. In professional contexts, this might mean maintaining composed demeanor during high-stress situations, even when experiencing significant anxiety. Your anxiety is information about the situation, but displaying it would undermine your leadership effectiveness. In personal relationships, this might mean not expressing every moment of irritation or frustration. You feel these emotions, but you evaluate whether expressing them would advance the relationship or just discharge your feeling without productive outcome. The capability develops through practice. Initially, maintaining behavioral control during emotional activation requires significant effort. Over time, the gap between emotion and response becomes more natural. You can experience strong emotions while maintaining composed, strategic behavior. Most people never develop this capability because they believe authenticity requires expressing feelings as they occur. But emotional authenticity doesn't require behavioral reactivity. You can be completely authentic about your emotional experience while being strategic about your behavioral response. Strategic operators develop reliable capacity for emotional regulation that lets them function effectively regardless of their internal emotional state. Most people focus on process, effort, and intentions. They measure success by how hard they worked, how authentic they were, or how well they followed established procedures. Strategic operators measure success by actual outcomes achieved. This outcome orientation fundamentally changes how you approach situations. Instead of asking, "Am I doing this right?" you ask, "Is this producing the result I want?" Instead of focusing on proper procedure, you focus on effective procedure. Machiavelli was explicit about this. Results matter more than methods. The prince who maintained proper procedures while losing territory was less effective than the prince who achieved desired outcomes through unconventional methods. This doesn't mean abandoning all process or ethics. It means subordinating process to outcomes. You follow procedures when they produce desired results. You modify or abandon procedures when they don't, assuming you can do so ethically. Consider professional contexts. The person who focuses on doing their job according to job description might work very hard while producing limited results. The person who focuses on what outcomes their role should produce might work very differently to maximize impact. In negotiations, outcome orientation means focusing on what terms you actually need rather than winning every point. Maybe you concede minor issues to secure major ones. Process-focused approach tries to win everything. Outcome-focused approach secures what matters while compromising on what doesn't. In personal development, outcome orientation means measuring progress by actual capability improvement rather than effort expended. You might study intensely but learn little. Outcome focus redirects to more effective learning methods even if they require less obvious effort. This creates specific discipline, constantly evaluating whether your current approach is actually producing desired results. If not, you adjust approach rather than continuing ineffective methods because they feel right or you've invested in them. Most people resist this because they want to believe that good process automatically produces good results. They want effort to count regardless of outcomes. But reality doesn't reward effort, it rewards results. Strategic operators accept this reality. They focus energy on approaches that actually work rather than approaches that feel right. They measure success by outcomes achieved rather than effort expended or intentions held. This requires honesty about what's working versus what isn't. You have to be willing to acknowledge when your current approach isn't producing desired results, even when you've invested significantly in it. That acknowledgement allows adjustment that effort-focused approach would resist. The key is maintaining ethical boundaries within outcome focus. Your desired outcomes should include maintaining integrity and treating people appropriately. When these are built into your outcome definition, outcome orientation becomes force for effective ethical operation. Every decision involves uncertainty about outcomes. Perfect information is rarely available. Strategic operators make decisions based on probability assessment rather than waiting for certainty. Most people avoid risk through inaction. They wait for more information, more certainty, more assurance before committing. This risk avoidance often means missing opportunities that required timely action. Strategic operators assess risk probability and magnitude, then make decisions based on that assessment. They're not risk-averse or risk-seeking. They're risk-calibrated. They take risks when probability and potential reward justify it. They avoid risks when probability or potential downside make them unwise. Machiavelli observed that excessive caution was as dangerous as excessive boldness. The leader who waited for perfect certainty before acting often found opportunities closed. The leader who assessed probability and acted decisively when justified maintained stronger position. This requires specific analytical approach. For any decision with uncertain outcome, assess. What's the probability of success? What's the potential upside if it works? What's the potential downside if it fails? Can I handle the downside if it occurs? Based on these assessments, you can make calibrated decisions. High probability of moderate reward might justify action. Low probability of massive reward might justify action if downside is manageable. High probability of minimal reward probably doesn't justify significant effort. This calculated approach contrasts with both excessive caution and reckless risk-taking. You're neither avoiding all risk nor taking all risks. You're taking calculated risks based on systematic assessment. In professional contexts, this might mean pursuing opportunities with uncertain outcomes when probability analysis suggests favorable risk-reward ratio. In personal contexts, this might mean making relationship or relocation decisions without perfect certainty, when assessment suggests probability justifies commitment. The capability develops through practice. Initially, you won't have good intuition for probability assessment. Over time, experience builds calibration between your assessments and actual outcomes. You learn what types of situations have what probability patterns. Most people never develop this because they want certainty before commitment. But requiring certainty means passing on most valuable opportunities, which inherently involve uncertainty. Strategic operators become comfortable making decisions under uncertainty based on calculated risk assessment, rather than waiting for certainty that rarely arrives. Effective operation often requires waiting for optimal timing, rather than acting when you feel ready. Most people act based on their emotional urgency, rather than strategic assessment of timing. This impatience creates several problems. Acting too early, before conditions are favorable, often produces worse results than waiting would have. Acting emotionally, rather than strategically, often means using suboptimal approach because you couldn't wait to develop better one. Strategic operators develop capacity to wait when waiting serves objectives, even when waiting feels uncomfortable. They act when timing is right strategically, rather than when they feel emotional urgency to act. Machiavelli observed that effective leaders waited for favorable conditions rather than forcing action during unfavorable ones. The general who waited for advantageous battle conditions won more consistently than the general who fought whenever emotional urgency or external pressure demanded it. This patience requires emotional regulation we discussed earlier. You might feel strong urgency to act, anger driving you toward confrontation, anxiety pushing you toward resolution, excitement pulling you toward immediate pursuit. Strategic patience means recognizing these emotional drives while maintaining discipline to wait for better timing. In negotiations, this might mean not accepting first offer, even when you're anxious to close deal. Better terms might be available if you demonstrate patience. In conflicts, this might mean waiting for emotions to cool rather than engaging when both parties are activated. In professional contexts, this might mean developing capabilities before pursuing opportunities, rather than pursuing immediately when you're not ready. In personal development, this might mean consistent small efforts over time, rather than intense bursts driven by temporary motivation. The key is distinguishing between strategic patience and procrastination. Procrastination avoids action due to fear or discomfort. Strategic patience delays action waiting for optimal timing. One is avoidance. The other is discipline. This requires clear assessment of what constitutes optimal timing. You're not waiting indefinitely. You're waiting for specific conditions that justify action. When those conditions arrive, you act decisively rather than continuing to wait. Most people struggle with this because cultural messaging emphasizes immediate action. Just do it. Don't wait. Take action now. This creates bias toward immediate action regardless of timing. Strategic operators resist this bias. They act when strategic assessment suggests timing is right, not when emotional urgency or cultural pressure demands immediate action. This discipline often produces significantly better results than immediate action would have. Different relationships serve different purposes and justify different investment levels. Strategic operators calibrate their relationship investment based on what each relationship actually provides, rather than treating all relationships equally. Most people invest based on history, proximity, or social obligation. They maintain relationships because they've always had them, because the person is family, or because social norms suggest they should. This creates a situation where they're heavily invested in relationships that don't serve them well, while underinvested in relationships that could be highly valuable. Strategic operators assess each relationship based on what it actually provides: support, growth, opportunity, enjoyment, learning. They invest proportionally to what the relationship delivers rather than based on historical or social factors. Machiavelli was explicit about calibrating alliances based on their actual value rather than sentiment or tradition. The alliance that once served purpose but no longer does shouldn't receive continued investment just because it existed historically. This doesn't mean being coldly transactional. It means being honest about what relationships actually provide and investing accordingly. Some relationships provide significant value. These justify significant investment. Some relationships drain more than they provide. These justify minimal investment regardless of history or social obligation. In professional contexts, this might mean investing heavily in relationships with people who help your growth and development, while reducing investment in relationships that consume time without providing value. In personal contexts, this might mean accepting that some friendships have run their course, rather than maintaining them from obligation. The calibration requires honest assessment that many people avoid. They don't want to acknowledge that certain relationships aren't serving them well because that feels disloyal or cold. But continuing heavy investment in relationships that don't serve you isn't loyalty. It's poor resource allocation. Strategic operators become comfortable with differential investment based on actual relationship value. They maintain many relationships at varying investment levels based on what each actually provides. This creates healthier relationship ecosystem. You're investing heavily where investment is reciprocated and valuable. You're maintaining minimal investment where relationships aren't serving you well. This produces better overall outcomes than equal investment everywhere. Most people resist this because it feels calculating. But resource management isn't calculating. It's responsible. You have limited time, energy, and attention. Allocating these based on what actually provides value is strategic operation, not cold manipulation. Circumstances change. Strategies that worked previously stop working. Relationships evolve. Your own capabilities develop. Effective operation requires continuous reassessment and adjustment rather than maintaining fixed approaches. Most people find an approach that works and stick with it indefinitely. They resist changing successful patterns even when circumstances have changed enough that those patterns are no longer optimal. This creates gradual decline in effectiveness as environment evolves while approach remains static. Strategic operators continuously evaluate whether their current approaches are still producing desired results. When they're not, operators adjust, rather than persisting with obsolete methods because they worked previously. Machiavelli observed that leaders who maintained flexibility survived, while leaders who rigidly maintained successful strategies eventually failed when circumstances changed. The general who adapted tactics to current battle conditions won more than the general who used same tactics that won previous battles. This continuous calibration applies across all domains. In professional contexts, it means regularly assessing whether your current approach to your work is still producing optimal results or whether changed conditions require new methods. In relationships, it means recognizing when relationship dynamics have shifted and adjusting your approach accordingly. In personal development, it means evaluating whether your current learning and growth strategies are still effective or whether you've plateaued and need different approaches. In strategic planning, it means updating your strategies based on new information rather than executing old plans because you invested in developing them. The discipline is establishing regular review cycles. Monthly or quarterly, step back and assess. Are my current approaches still producing desired results? Have circumstances changed in ways that suggest I should adjust? What's working that I should do more of? What's not working that I should modify or eliminate? Most people resist this because they want to believe that finding right approach once means never having to change it. They want stability and predictability. But environments evolve, and approaches that don't evolve with them become progressively less effective. Strategic operators accept that effective operation requires ongoing adjustment. They're not searching for permanent, perfect approach. They're continuously calibrating current approach based on current conditions and results. This creates adaptive advantage. When circumstances change, they adjust quickly rather than persisting with obsolete approaches. When new information emerges, they incorporate it rather than sticking with outdated strategies. The key is maintaining core principles while continuously adjusting tactical implementation. Your values and ultimate objectives might remain stable. Your specific approaches should evolve based on what's actually working in current conditions. The pattern is clear. Strategic operation requires specific capabilities that most people never develop. Selective disclosure rather than automatic transparency. Contextual adaptation rather than rigid consistency. Emotional regulation separating feeling from reaction. Outcome orientation rather than process focus. Calculated risk assessment rather than avoidance or recklessness. Strategic patience rather than emotional urgency. Relationship calibration based on actual value. Continuous adjustment rather than static approaches. These capabilities aren't personality traits you're born with. They're skills you develop through deliberate practice. Each can be improved through focused attention and consistent application. Machiavelli operated in an environment where strategic incompetence was fatal. Leaders who operated reactively rather than strategically lost position, resources, often life itself. Modern environments have lower stakes usually, but basic dynamics remain. Strategic operators achieve objectives more consistently than reactive ones. The practical path is focusing on one capability at a time. Pick the one that seems most relevant to current challenges. Practice deliberately for a sustained period. Once it becomes more natural, add another capability. Over time, these capabilities integrate into general strategic operation. You're not consciously applying separate skills. You're naturally operating more strategically across contexts. The conscious practice develops unconscious competence. Most people resist developing these capabilities because they conflict with cultural messaging about authenticity, emotional expression, and consistency. You're taught to be yourself in every situation, express feelings as they occur, and maintain consistent approach regardless of circumstances. But these teachings optimize for appearing authentic rather than being effective. Strategic operation optimizes for actual results while maintaining genuine integrity through consistent values applied flexibly. The ultimate integration is becoming someone who achieves desired outcomes consistently across varying circumstances, not through luck or favorable conditions, but through developed capability for strategic operation that adapts to conditions while maintaining directional progress. Type this commitment. I develop strategic capability systematically. If this framework provided value, engage and share. Most people operate reactively, based on emotions and habits, rather than developing strategic capabilities. Real effectiveness comes from deliberate capability development, not personality traits, but practiced skills that improve through focused attention and consistent application.